Military history is full of glorious victories and heroic defeats, but sometimes armies manage to lose battles without the enemy ever firing a shot. Here are 3 remarkable stories of how alcohol, boredom, and paranoia turned mighty forces into their own worst enemies.
History 1.
The Battle of Karansebes. In 1788, Emperor Joseph II of Habsburg dragged Austria into yet another war with the Ottoman Empire. A multinational Austrian army of roughly 100,000 soldiers set up camp near the present-day town of Karansebes. The atmosphere was thick with exhaustion and heat. On the evening of the 17th of September, a reconnaissance party of Austrian hussars crossed the Tamish River in search of traces of the enemy. Instead of Turks, however, they came across a caravan of local Roma, who offered to sell them barrels of strong schnapps. The weary cavalrymen eagerly struck a deal and began a drinking session. The idyll was interrupted by the arrival of a detachment of Austrian infantry. The foot soldiers, thirsty for alcohol, demanded an equal share of the liquor. The hussars, already under the influence, refused and surrounded the barrels with a makeshift barricade. A vulgar quarrel broke out, which quickly turned into a brawl. In the general chaos, one of the enraged soldiers drew his weapon and fired a shot. The crack of the gunshot in the darkness of the night acted on the drunken soldiers like a detonator. Someone in the infantry, wanting to scare the cavalry, screamed at the top of his lungs, "Turks! Turks!" The terrified hussars, convinced they had been attacked from behind by the Ottoman army, fled in panic toward the main camp. At the same time, the greatest weakness of this army revealed itself: its multinational character. Soldiers speaking German, Hungarian, Czech, Serbian, or Italian did not understand the orders being given. When officers tried to bring the situation under control by shouting, "Halt! Halt!" in German, soldiers from other provinces who did not know the language heard in it the Muslim cry, "Allah! Allah!" The conviction that a Turkish assault was underway became absolute. Panicked masses began trampling their own tents. Artillery commanders, seeing the cavalry racing through the darkness and hearing shouts in foreign tongues, concluded that the camp was being overrun by Ottoman horsemen and gave the order to open fire with cannons straight into the crowd. The Austrians began shooting, stabbing with bayonets, and trampling one another. In the general madness, even Emperor Joseph II himself was wounded, falling into the river while fleeing from his own subjects. When the real Turkish army, led by the Grand Vizier, arrived at Karansebes 2 days later, the stunned Ottomans found a battlefield strewn with bodies, abandoned weapons, and fleeing survivors. Victory was handed to them on a plate without a single shot being fired. To this day, many myths have grown up around the losses at Karansebes. 19th century chronicles wrote of as many as 10,000 dead. Modern historians are skeptical of that figure, estimating the real losses at anywhere from several hundred to a maximum of 2,000 men, and considering the rest to be deserters who simply ran home. Regardless of the scale of the losses, the event is still regarded as one of the greatest military embarrassments in history, a textbook example of how a lack of discipline, a language barrier, and alcohol can annihilate a powerful army more effectively than any enemy. The only war after which an army came back larger. In 1866, the Austro-Prussian War broke out in Central Europe, a conflict meant to decide which of these two powers would dominate the German Confederation. The tiny Principality of Liechtenstein, tied politically and geographically to Vienna, felt obliged to fulfill its declarations of alliance. The little state had no great resources, so it sent its entire available army to the front, a contingent of just 80 soldiers. From the perspective of the small principality, the conflict looked completely different than it did on the bloody battlefields of Sadowa. The soldiers from Liechtenstein were tasked with patrolling the Stelvio Pass on the border with Italy, which was an ally of Prussia. Instead of bloody clashes, the young recruits found themselves in picturesque alpine surroundings. Throughout the entire campaign, they did not see a single Prussian uniform, and their only opponent was boredom. Life on the border resembled an extended holiday. The soldiers smoked pipes, drank local wine, and admired the mountain scenery without firing a single shot. When the war ended and the signing of the peace was announced, the unit packed up its belongings and marched back toward Vaduz. When the commander ordered the final muster and began counting his subordinates, it turned out that the head count came to 81 men. Many legends have grown up around the identity of the mysterious companion. The most popular version says he was an Italian deserter or a homeless boy who had befriended the marching soldiers, and they decided to take him with them to their homeland. Other sources suggest he was an Austrian liaison officer assigned to escort the group. Whatever the truth, the return of an army in greater numbers than it had set out with became one of Europe's most charming wartime anecdotes. 2 years after this event, in 1868, Prince John II the Good deemed maintaining a military an unnecessary expense and officially disbanded Liechtenstein's army. Since then, the principality has had no armed forces of its own, relying on neutrality and international treaties, and remaining a symbol of a state for which its only war turned out to be a festival of hospitality. Japan's invisible fleet. In 1904, the Russian Empire was suffering humiliating defeats in its war with Japan in the Far East. The Tsarist command, hoping to turn the tide of the conflict, made the desperate decision to send the Baltic fleet on a gigantic, months-long voyage to the other side of the world. From the very beginning, the mission was tainted by deep paranoia. Rumors circulated among Russian officers that Japanese agents had infiltrated Europe and were building secret bases for torpedo boats in the North Sea ready to attack the Russian battleships en route. The atmosphere aboard the ships was extremely tense. On the night of the 21st to the 22nd of October 1904, as the squadron was passing through thick fog in the area of the Dogger Bank fishing grounds in the North Sea, sailors spotted the silhouettes of small vessels and flashing lights on the horizon. Instead of the Japanese Navy, these were British fishing trawlers from Hull, peacefully catching herring. Gripped by panic, the Russians wasted no time verifying their targets. The flagship battleship Knyaz Suvorov gave the order to immediately open fire with guns of all calibers. For a dozen or so minutes, hell broke loose over the calm fishing grounds. The Russian ships fired so chaotically that they not only sank one British trawler and killed several fishermen, but in the general madness began shelling themselves. The Russian cruiser Aurora came under heavy fire from its own battleships. Although it was not seriously damaged, the greatest loss was the death of the ship's chaplain and one sailor. The Dogger Bank incident sparked an enormous international scandal. Great Britain, then the world's greatest naval power, flew into a rage. The British public demanded immediate war, and the Royal Navy began mobilizing ships to blockade and destroy the Tsarist fleet. Russia avoided a second conflict only thanks to humiliating apologies, the payment of a gigantic indemnity, and the diplomatic intervention of France. The Baltic fleet was able to continue its voyage around Africa and Asia, but disastrous command and a nervous atmosphere never left it, right up to its tragic end. In May 1905, after traveling more than 30,000 kilometers, the utterly exhausted Russian squadron reached the area of the Tsushima Strait, where a modern, superbly trained Japanese fleet under the command of Admiral Togo was waiting for it. The Battle of Tsushima ended in total catastrophe for the Russians. Most of the Tsarist battleships were sunk or forced to surrender. The incident of Japan's invisible fleet in the North Sea became a historical symbol of how disastrous command, lack of training, and collective paranoia can turn an elite military formation into a dangerous threat to itself and to innocent civilians, before a real enemy even appears on the horizon. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to History One, and tell us in the comments what topic we should cover next.